Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session. How's everyone feeling today? Are you guys okay? Is anyone awake out there? How is everyone feeling today? All right, okay, that's a little bit better, but hopefully by the end of this session, you'll actually be feeling energized by Cisco iOS XE and some automation and tooling. So hello, everyone. My name is DeWeese, and I'm a technical marketing engineer here at Cisco Systems. So I focus primarily on Cisco IOS XE. So that could be from routers to switches to wireless LAN controllers. And how do we actually automate these toolings and the configuration to make our lives easier, faster, and more efficient? So today I'm excited to talk to you about some of the tooling that we actually have to make your life easier. So let's get started. This is the overall agenda for today. So this is the longer version. The shorter version is we're going to talk about some programmability and automation. We're going to get into some tooling, which is where we'll focus most of our time together today. And then we'll actually talk about some use cases. So what's the value of programmability and automation? What's the value of these tools? And how can we leverage them to the best of our abilities? So then, of course, we'll wrap up with some resources about how you can continue on in your journey of programmability and automation and how you can become the best that you can at it. So to get started, we're going to go into a very brief intro into programmability and automation as a whole. So before we get started, does anyone use programmability today in their networks? Nice. I see some hands. All right. Hopefully, by the end of this session, a few more people will be raising their hands as to wanting to use programmability and wanting to automate their networks. So let's start off with the why. Why is programmability important? Why is it interesting? So we have a network engineer, and they've just onboarded 5,000 new Catalyst routers into their network. And now they're thinking, okay, we're onboarded, we have our devices plugged into the network, we can access them, but now what? How do we actually configure them and make sure that they have all of the necessary features turned on and actually functional so that we can start using them as members of our network? So that's where we talk about our device configuration, or day one in the programmability and automation lifecycle. And we have a few different types of tooling. So we have Yang Suite from Cisco, we have Terraform, we have Ansible, PyATS, and today we'll talk about the first three. Here's an overview of the entire programmability and automation lifecycle. And here we have from day zero, which is where you actually onboard your device or plug it in. We have options for how to automate that process. And this is with using zero-touch provisioning or even secure zero-touch provisioning. And in the day one, we've already talked about the tooling. That's where we'll focus today for device configuration. Then we move down to day two, and this is where we have our device monitoring. So this is when we want to look at trends over time. So what does our network look like over the course of a week or a month or a year? And what are some ways that we can actually help to troubleshoot or see where there may be issues and then improve those over time? Lastly, we have our device optimization. So this is when we take things even one step further. And for example, we can use the guest shell, so we can run Python scripts directly within our Cisco iOS XE device. Again, today we'll just be talking about device configuration, the tooling, and the use cases. So to get started, we can talk about our model-driven telemetry interface comparison. So we have netconf, restconf, and GNMI, and these are each different ways or technologies to actually go out and talk to your device. And this is an overall matrix basically showing the comparisons between them. So if you have any questions about, okay, well, which one is best for me? This is an overview slide, but just as a reference, we'll skip over it pretty quickly and get right into the Yang data models. So to get started, we have netconf, restconf, and GNMI, and for telemetry, gRPC. And each one of these, again, are ways that we can connect to or talk to our network devices and configure them or get telemetry data from them. But really, what's underneath all of this is our Yang data models. And we have a few different types. So the first that we have is our Cisco native models. And these are specific to anything Cisco related, if you can't tell by the name. So with the Cisco native models, what we do here is this is anything within the running config of your device. It will be modeled in Cisco native. We also have our open config models, and these are more generic. So these will be for basically any different type of device that you have, Cisco or non-Cisco. You can use open config models to configure all of them. Now, the Cisco native ones are a little bit more, you can get more granular with them. You can make more specific Cisco changes based on the Cisco features. Open config is more generic, so that's the difference there. For both our Cisco native and our open config models, we have both configuration and operational models as well. So configuration is when we want to make a config change. We want to go in, edit things, make them new, or maybe add a new feature, turn something on, turn something off. And with our operational models, this is when we want to get data from our device. So maybe we want to look at some telemetry data over time. That's when we would just want to do a get. Maybe we want to pull, every second or every 30 seconds and get the CPU data. So this is an overview of the Yang models, and this is really a foundation for where programmability and automation comes in. You can access all of our Yang models over on GitHub. So for every release of Cisco IOS XE, we actually post all of the Yang models that are supported. You can take a look at some examples here. So again, if you're looking for some Cisco-specific ones, we have BGP, for example. And if it has the dash oper afterwards, you know it's operational or get-only data, whereas if it doesn't have that oper afterwards, then this will be a configuration model. So now let's get into some of our toolings. We can start off with Yang Suite. Does anyone use Yang Suite today? I see a couple hands. Okay, nice. So Yang Suite is actually a tooling that was developed in-house by Cisco about 10 or 12 years ago. It was used internally for a very long time. Then, in the last couple of years, we actually released this publicly, and now it's available to the general. It's, again, free, publicly available, so you can go out to developer.cisco.com/Yang Suite, and you can learn about how Yang Suite works. You can actually download it into, say, a virtual machine in your own network, and then start playing around with it to understand, okay, how do these Yang models work? How can I actually connect to my device programmatically? So I come from a iOS XE background, but you can also use Yang Suite for XR or NX devices as well. So it's pretty open, pretty generic for you. Really, the purpose of Yang Suite is so that we can understand and visualize the Yang models that we were just talking about in the last few slides. So here, here with Yang Suite, we'll be able to visualize what the structure is of these Yang models. So we can see the containers themselves, we can see what's in each container, and from there we'll be able to build out various payloads using netconf, restconf, or GNMI, for example. So now let's get into a use case. What could we actually use Yang Suite for? What's the power of it? So let's take the use case of we want to turn on a few telemetry subscriptions. So in this case, we want to get something, say, CPU data every 30 seconds. How do we do that? We turn on a telemetry subscription. So there's one way you can do this using CLI, for example. You can turn on a telemetry subscription. But in this case, we want to use Yang Suite and netconf. So how we do it is we have our device on one side, and then we're going to use Yang Suite to actually build up this payload. So all of our data is actually going to be coming through Yang Suite. So how specifically this works, or how we build up the payload, is first we go into Yang Suite and we find the Yang model that we're going to be working with. So if, for example, you wanted to do something with the running config, again, we can take like maybe CPU, for example. You could find that in the running config, or we could take something like maybe we wanted to change an interface, shut it down, turn it on, off, or add an interface description. We can use different Yang models to actually build up these payloads. And from Yang Suite itself, we can actually push those payloads to our device directly. Now, this is assuming that Yang Suite is within a network that can talk to your devices. So if this is, if everything is connected, then you can use Yang Suite directly and make configuration changes. So the power of this is really, you don't need to log into all of your different devices. You don't need to go to the console. You don't need to type out the CLI for every config change that you need. Instead, you can now use Yang Suite to actually push all of this all the config changes to your devices all at once. And so this is really important for scalability, for example. So here we're pushing our CPU data using Yang Suite. So this is a little bit more detail about how we're going to do this. We can use the Yang Suite tooling, and we actually go in and build up our payload. And then there are a few ways that we can work with this. So first of all, once we have our payload within Yang Suite, we can push it directly using this button in the center here. This one is the run the RPC, or basically like push this over to our device. And once this, say, telemetry subscription is created, we can start collecting data from our device over a regular interval. So there are more examples and resources about how to actually do this. If you want to check out, we have videos on YouTube, for example, about how to do this, and we also have examples on GitHub. So next, we can switch gears a little bit and move away from Yang Suite. And now we'll be talking about a few different options for infrastructure as code. Is anyone familiar with this term, IAC? Okay, I see quite a few of us. So we're going to be talking about the infrastructure as code toolings, both Ansible and Yang Suite. So to get started, first of all, what is infrastructure as code? IAC is the process of actually mapping the changes that we want to make. So in this case, configuration changes. We'll be doing this through code rather than actually going to the CLI and typing out the config changes. So generally, we talk about things as being coming from an imperative approach. And what this means is we type out, say, the CLIs line by line. Okay, first I want to change this interface, then I want to change that interface. And we go through step by step or line by line. But with the infrastructure as code, or with this declarative approach, essentially what we're going to be doing is describing what we want the end result to look like rather than the intermediary steps, and basically writing out the step by step. So with the declarative approach, we're actually going to be using infrastructure as code, and it will be converting the end result that we say we want and have described into the step-by-step for us. So let's get started with Ansible, first of all. So Ansible is an infrastructure as code tooling. Does anyone use Ansible here today? Nice, quite a few hands. That's awesome. Okay, so Ansible is a really powerful tool that actually helps us do quite a few different things. But today we're talking about how do we work with Cisco IOS XE and Ansible. So we have two different options. We can work with netconf or restconf in Ansible. And I've seen lots of different examples of both. So it's really your choice in which one you determine or which one you want to use here. Now, we have an example playbook here. And let's break this down a little bit. So this is an example in Ansible of what we can actually do. And in this case, what we're doing is we're creating a telemetry subscription. So going back to Yang Suite for a minute, once we build up a payload, we have the option to automatically, on the spot, generate an Ansible playbook. And this is an example of what it could actually look like. So in this Ansible playbook, what we're doing is we're configuring something, and we're specifically going to edit or modify the current config on our device. In this case, we're going to add a subscription. This is subscription number 1 we'll be adding. And this is a gRPC subscription, so we'll be adding specifically, okay, we want to get CPU and the average over 5 seconds. So that's what the XPath here is telling us. And we want to send this data at a regular interval over to this receiver. Now, this is one example of what one subscription could look like. But now let's take a broader approach of, okay, how could we do this to make something more interesting? Once we get that telemetry data, we can create graphs such as this one. So in this case, we're using a Telegraph Influx and Grafana stack. So Telegraph is actually where we're going to be sending the data directly. We have a subscription. It's going directly from our Cisco IOS XE device to Telegraph. Telegraph then stores it into an Influx, in this into a database. In this case, we're using InfluxDB. And from there, we actually use Grafana, which is how we're able to visualize the data in these terms of charts and graphs. So once we go from there, right, that's how we go from, say, the device all the way over to Grafana, and we can visualize things. We can get really interesting data. Like, for example, here we're talking about power over Ethernet, or PoE. So in this case, we're actually going to be turning on all of our devices, all of our PoE devices at the beginning of a workday, for example. Then when everyone goes home around 5 or 6 o'clock, say, we're going to turn off our PoE devices. So that's where you see the drops, right? And in this case, this is how we're going to be saving power, how we're saving energy, is by having those PoE devices on or up during the day and off, down at night when everybody's at home sleeping and relaxing. So next we can get into Terraform. Terraform is another infrastructure as code tooling. And this one is created by HashiCorp, and it's built against the RESTconf API. So if you're familiar with REST, for example, the operations are typically to get, put, post, patch, these types of things. Then that's where Terraform comes in. It's working with REST or with RESTconf. So we have a Terraform provider specifically for Cisco IOS XE. This can be found on the Terraform registry, and this one is completely declarative. So you can see an example of some of the features that are supported here, but one thing to note with this particular provider is if there's anything you can do with RESTconf, you can do it with Terraform. We also have a CLI as well. So basically, if you want to take the CLI that you would typically push to devices, now you can use Terraform, and you can place your CLI right in here. So here we have an interface. In this case, it's a loopback. We have a new description. And from there, we can actually push this direct CLI using Terraform to one or multiple devices. So this is really the power of Terraform. And we can get into shortly how it's different than Ansible, how it's different than Yang Suite with the use cases. But before diving into that, let's talk a little bit more about the Terraform terminology and how do we actually use this thing. So first of all, we have an execution plan file. And essentially, what this plan file does is it's in JSON formatting. It has a .tf extension. And this is where we'll be storing our data about how we actually want to configure the device. So within this file, we have a provider. In this case, we're using the iOS XE one. And that's how we'll be able to configure our devices specifically. Now, in this particular example, in the two green boxes here, we have our different resources. So within Terraform, there's the concept of resources, but in terms of iOS XE, that essentially means a feature. What are we going to be doing with it? So the first thing that we have in this example is we're going to create a new VLAN. In this case, VLAN 511. We'll be creating it from scratch, essentially using this Terraform execution plan file. And then the second green box here is where we're going to actually get that VLAN. We'll be able to view it and understand, okay, did we create it properly? Did it work out? And so that's overall like an example of what the Terraform files will look like, just how previously we'd looked at an example of what an Ansible file would look like. So now let's try to understand, okay, well, what's different about all of these? They're all different tools. They all have some pretty cool capabilities. But to start off with, let's talk about Terraform. So Terraform itself is stateful, which is different than Ansible and Yang Suite, which are stateless. And we can get into that in just a second. But essentially, by Terraform being stateful, what this means is it checks the current config before making any changes. So for example, if we wanted to create a new interface, a new loopback, for example, in that case, typically we would just write either the CLI, okay, yes, we want to create this new loopback, or with Yang Suite or Ansible, we would just push the new configuration, yes, create this new loopback. But with Terraform, what it does is it first checks the current device and says, hey, do I have this particular loopback that you're trying to create? And if so, it will edit the current one or notify you, hey, you already have this one created, so do you actually want to create it again? Do you want to create a different one? So that puts more power in your hands as the one who's actually going out and making these configuration changes. The real power, though, with Terraform is it has this operation Terraform destroy. And that essentially means once you run Terraform for the first time, like we were just looking at this file here, once we execute this, we've created a VLAN 511. But say we kind of made a mistake. We didn't actually want to create 511. We meant to create 512 or something like that. Instead of creating a whole new Terraform file that says do the no of that command or actually delete what we already did, we can simply run Terraform destroy as an operation. And this will remove the config that we had just pushed to the device. So this is really what makes Terraform powerful for us, is we don't need to learn how to both configure and unconfigure the device. As long as we know how to create or turn on a feature, we can just as easily turn it off with Terraform destroy. So here's a more specific Terraform file. And in this case, again, we're going to be creating some model-driven telemetry subscriptions. So I know this is a little bit small, but we will make sure that the PowerPoint is available for you later on in the app. So then you'll be able to check it out in more detail what this looks like. We also have this example posted on GitHub as well. So feel free to check out our examples there, and you can actually run this yourself. So again, that leads us back to the end result, or the example of, okay, now we can do something really cool with that. Once we use Terraform to actually turn on subscriptions, we can get something awesome like a graph like this that shows us, okay, what's actually happening in our network. And from there, especially using Terraform, we can just as easily remove all of these subscriptions from our device. So now let's talk a little bit about the comparisons. How do we look at each one of these, and how do we decide which one to use? So one thing that really sets Terraform apart is that Terraform is the only stateful technology that we've actually described today. So if you do want something that's stateful, go ahead and use Terraform. One thing to note about Yang Suite is it's primarily used to better understand the Yang models itself, but it's not as often used for scale. So typically we'll use Yang Suite to go out and understand how do we configure a device. And from there, we can scale it up using other technologies like Ansible, like Terraform, like Python. And also Yang Suite gives us the operation to actually generate these Python scripts or to generate the Ansible playbooks as well. So again, this is an overview of some of the comparisons between these. This is not an all-inclusive or complete list, but if you want to chat more about these after the session, I'm happy to go into more detail about these. And in our last few moments together, I want to go over a few different resources that we have. So you've just heard this one session that we're in currently over on Tuesday afternoon. We have quite a few other sessions on programmability and automation specifically for iOS XE later in the week. So if you're interested, feel free to check out this QR code, which has a link to a blog with all of these different sessions, the links, and how you can get involved with them. We also have quite a few Cisco U models. So we have some on Yang Suite, one on Yang Suite and NetConf, one on Yang Suite and RESTconf. We also have one on Terraform, and even the day zero operation of going through zero-touch provisioning. So if you're interested in kind of a how-to or a step-by-step, definitely check out our Cisco U models. We also just recently published a DevNet site. And so here, this is basically the one-stop shop for all of the things that we chatted about today, whether it's how to actually download and install Yang Suite, or we also have webinars that show how to use these different toolings in ways that we didn't have a chance to chat about together today. We also have white papers, for example, about the overall programmability API, and much, much more. So speaking of APIs and white papers, this is the link to the API white paper that is published free, publicly available to you. And we're currently working on posting a model-driven telemetry white paper as well. So that will be coming out in the next couple weeks or so. If you'd like to get hands-on with any of these things, we have a dcloud environment. So as long as you have a Cisco account, you can go in here, reserve dcloud, and actually be able to start working with these different toolings, starting to understand, okay, how does Ansible work? How does Terraform work? We have Yang Suite also installed in this environment, so you can start working with it directly. We also have a programmability book sprints book if you're interested in reading more details here. And we have the infamous configuration guide. So this is a very detailed description of each feature, how you can turn them on, how you can turn them off, and how you can work with all of the Cisco iOS XE features programmatically. So I'll wrap up here by encouraging you to get more involved with Cisco DevNet. There's a lot happening this week. And please feel free to submit feedback in the surveys within the Cisco Events app. If you have any questions for me, feel free to come up afterwards, and I'd love to chat with you more. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.